Awesome, Bohan. Welcome to the future of fashion business. Happy to have you on. Very excited for our conversation. Thanks for making the time, man, especially so late.
No, no worries. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, I am very excited about today's conversation. I think that I haven't had the opportunity to talk about a lot of people that have been involved like you, in both aspects of the industry, both the Chinese aspect or perspective from the fashion scene and creative scenes, and also Western sense of, perspective in fashion industry. So I'm very, very excited about what we're going to talk about today. But before we actually get into, the specifics of all of that, I do want to, me, myself, and obviously the audience, I have a big struggle introducing my guests because they do a lot of different things, and it's hard. It's hard enough to introduce yourself as a person, let alone somebody else introduce you for you. So,
Yeah.
can you give us a little short introduction about who you are and what you do for people that are out there listening?
Sure. I mean, like you said, I always find it even hard to introduce myself. And then like working as a PR, I'm actually the worst PR for my own. So I guess I can dive back a little bit. So I'm Bohan. I was born and raised in China, and then I studied like in high school in Canada, and then like university in Hong Kong, and also in Paris. And originally, I didn't really study or was thinking about pursuing fashion as a career. I studied politics and journalism, and a bit of French. And then, I always kind of dreamt to become a diplomat growing up. So that was kind of the career path there. And then I was studying in Paris, and then just like randomly one day I was going to school on the metro. And then this lady just asked me if I wanted to go casting for a model agency. So I was like, okay, sure, yeah, let's make some extra cash during university. Paris is expensive. So I kind of just ended up modeling there, but I never really did it too seriously because I always had the school on the side. And I very much enjoyed like writing all the time, and kind of also because of my studies. So I did a lot of like writing on my own like blogs back then when people used to use blogs, and also kind of freelancing for a couple of publications here. And then so that's kind of how I started and got into the fashion industry in the very first place. And then after I graduated, I worked at Mr. Porter for 4 years, which is I guess people they know about Mr. Porter. It's this like kind of luxury e-commerce from London, and then I was kind of in charge of developing their the Asia Pacific side of the business in PR, and then later on also in kind of content production as well. So that was fun, definitely. I think working with I think Mr. Porter had, when I was there, about 500 brands, and then obviously you have brands ranging everything from like Tom Ford, Brunello Cucinelli to Off-White, Balenciaga. So also like all these really interesting new and upcoming brands from around the world. So I guess from then developed this very wide spectrum of how brands and different brands from different places in the world work, can develop. What's the message? Obviously, we were working on the ground here in Asia, and I think a big part of it I found was that you always needed to find the resonance or why people in Asia should care about this tiny story from this tiny place in the middle of America, for example. What's the connection there? Because I think I was also growing up in a time, I think our whole generation of people in China was growing up kind of in the period of time when you can feel like the global macro geopolitical economy was shifting, and also the positioning, how we feel, our identities. So I think, that was definitely a very big part that, I had no one to kind of, not no one, but my boss back then, who I really respect, he was Australian, he worked in Asia for a very long time as well. But I think a lot of the stuff that goes on in China and South Korea and Hong Kong, Singapore and stuff, you also kind of have to like maneuver and learn through just doing. So I kind of, I guess but Mr. Porter for sure had a very big impact on me. I think in terms of how they combine content with commerce, which is still very much at the core of, I think my belief right now, whenever we're approaching content, PR, communications, etc. And then during my time there, I also, I always wanted to like be mega busy. I think that's still a very annoying, like trait about myself. So I kind of like, what did I do? I also started a brand, was a bag brand with a couple of my friends, but they're all based in like Copenhagen and Stockholm. We were like good friends before. We did that, and so we like I was like doing our own shooting of the campaign. We had to do showrooms, and then have to figure out our own e-commerce, logistics, shipping, and I also like was writing different kind of content on the website, manage all of your own social media. So I think the brand was definitely, it was a very fun project for everyone to collaborate. And we literally had the brand over like Skype back then when people we were all based in like, Paris, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and I was in Hong Kong at the time. And we just kind of, we met like twice a year in Paris for the showrooms. But the rest of the time we kind of just did it, in our own places. And it kind of, so I think that was definitely a fun project. And I also wrote kind of like columns here and there. And I kind of kept myself busy, I guess. And then in 2019, I made a decision to move to Shanghai. And then kind of one thing led to another. I like ended up now with this, with Bow Project, which is, so we're a company that does communications. We do creative direction, so like kind of creative production for advertising campaigns, and also events, and also social media, because all the social media in China kind of runs on a completely different system. So that's actually quite a big chunk of the workload. It's like, because here, a lot of the brands in overseas, they use Instagram, and that's kind of the one and only place you need to be on. And in China, there's like a million different social media ecosystems that run parallel to the rest of the world. So you also need to, all the time think about how do you take those things and then translate, and each social media kind of had their own algorithms and ecosystem and way of thinking, and how do you use the brand's content. Or also we all, very more and more so nowadays, we have to create localized content as well, so that, people really resonate. So you can really feel this kind of shift of the market, I guess, since my career.
Of course. Awesome, man. And when it came to, starting the PR agency, or I guess, what would you say Bow Project essentially is? Is it more PR? Is it more creative direction? Because I know it's a mixture.
Hard. Because like, I think, to be honest, when I started, there weren't also as many similar not competitor, but like kind of models we could follow. Or, of course, there are amazing PR agencies out there that I really respect, both locally and also internationally. There's also amazing kind of creative direction artists, like kind of campaign advertising agencies out there as well, amazing event agencies. And nowadays I was joking about, we probably have to start an art consultancy agency nowadays, or department, because we're kind of getting more and more into that area as well. But I just always feel like I kind of don't want to define it as a PR agency or like a creative agency. I don't know. It's always hard, because I think this also came from my nature of always wanted to try and do everything.
Right.
Or because also I think, on the other hand, is that I feel like all these things should be linked together, instead of traditionally, you kind of have to go out to different partners and agencies with completely different thinking. And then, for example, if you go to a creative agency, they just think everything's super creative, but then they don't really previous, like sometimes they probably lose the message, or like if this thing will really resonate.
Right.
And that's kind of where you need the PR department to come in and be like, hey, this is not going to work. We need to shoot this thing in this way, featuring this kind of people, so that people find relevant. And also, you have the, let's say, even like working with the brand's designers. Like, I think previously you have a lot of designers. I think, no, like most designers, they have their own vision, they have their own concepts, and then they create this thing, and then they kind of just like give it to the next level and the next level to execute and spread and stuff.
Right.
And I always felt like that, like, stream needs to be not revolutionized, but like updated a little bit. so that, for example, I feel like previously, sometimes I would get content or assets that was perhaps produced by our European colleagues or American colleagues. And then I just felt like, okay, people here don't care.
Right.
So then later on, in the process, I started, also participating in the initial creation part of the content or the concept, to make sure that this is whatever content that we create is a message that people will believe and care. And
Right.
then the PR parts gets easier, and then everything becomes a lot smoother. Or like when even talking to the designer and say these are the people you should potentially think about collaboration, because that will have an impact. And then they kind of go there again.
Mm.
I feel like, yeah, I think definitely that Dolce and Gabbana incident, was it 2018,
Yeah.
when it happened. I could kind of feel like it was a paradigm shift of how kind of foreign brands enter China. I think they're like, okay, shit. They suddenly realize, okay,
Yeah.
we
The
can't
importance
just do
of it.
whatever. Yeah, we can't just kind of do whatever we think is good. We really have to listen to the local teams and experts who are people who are actually in the culture. They understand a lot deeper of what's right, what's wrong. And then, like now a lot more and more of them respect, obviously also because China has a completely different rule of playing. Yeah.
Of course. Awesome. And when you decided to start the Bow project, what was the motivation behind it? Was it that you spotted a gap in the marketplace that needed fulfillment and you were like, hey, I have the skill sets that are required for this? Was it just literally just having you like an entrepreneurial need? What was the biggest motivation?
To be honest, like I literally started the company because I had to like issue invoices because at the beginning I just wanted to freelance. I moved to Shanghai. I was like, oh, you know what? Like I worked for 4 years in a big company, and I just kind of want to like take a chill pill. And then I kind of arrived, and then I was friends with a lot of Chinese designers now who are making, they're all becoming like these superstars, from quite a while, like a while back, and we were just friends before. And I remember when I moved back to Shanghai, kind of it was Shanghai Fashion Week, and then everyone was like, oh, actually, can we work together? So I was like, oh, okay, shit, okay, then I better like make everything formal and like issue invoices and stuff like that.
Right.
It kind of just led from that, started from there. So for sure, like we work with a lot of like foreign brands coming into the Asian market, but also equally a lot of homegrown creative talents, designers, brands who are not only growing up here, but also they're kind of this new generation of Chinese designers that are, we call it like on the same playing field as the rest of the world because of the
Right.
internet, like
Yeah, the
Instagram.
Feng Cheng Wangs, the project Nidu. Which one is the really strong one coming up? Is it Nidu project?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, yeah, I know which ones you mean. Yeah, yeah. Didu, Didu. It was Didu, Didu. That's the one.
Didu, yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
Didu, Didu.
Didu. Yeah, Didu is a good friend. Yeah, I think that generation is, I think that kind of, we're kind of in that generation where, we all studied abroad. We know what's going on in Europe and the US. Everyone studied in Parsons, Antwerp, CSM or LCF.
Yeah.
We get it. Like, well, we learn, of course, a lot of the methodologies through school or previous job experiences, and we kind of see this wave of people coming back here and just with this knowledge and skill set, and then doing something that's different and original here.
Right.
So I feel like that's super exciting, and that was kind of the movement. I felt like, okay, I really need to be part of this movement.
Of course.
Um,
And what do you think is the biggest motivation for people to, go back to Shanghai after experiencing, Western creative culture?
it's funny because I was always thinking about this because like I think we're also the generation that when we were young, we always wanted to leave.
Exactly. That's
Uh,
what I mean, because that's like the dream, right? The dream is to go become a designer, go to New York, be in Parsons, be in CSM, maybe start a brand in London. But a lot of people are going back to Shanghai. And what's ironic is that they're going back to Shanghai, but not really to just focus on the Chinese market. They're going back to Shanghai to expand internationally. So what do you
yeah,
think the mindset behind that is?
I think it's that I think our generation grew up in a time when obviously China was also growing economically.
Yeah, yeah.
When we were younger, obviously, like resources are like, for sure we're from like comfortable families, which obviously we're already really, really privileged. And our parents' generation were the generation that was really like fighting for the kind of infrastructure and the base of our current economy.
Of course.
So I think a lot of our kids in our generation had the huge privilege to be able to study abroad. And then when we first went outside, I remember I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. I want to like, I'm gonna like set up or I don't know, work. And in Paris, when I was studying there, I was like trying to apply for jobs and stuff like that. Obviously, I think it was very, very hard to get working visas.
Right.
I wrote a lot about kind of systematic racism when I was back then, and a lot of like diet racism here and there that I experienced personally. I can't speak for everyone though, but and then secondly, I think it was I think when we were like kind of graduating uni and then started working, and that was a good time. That was kind of the time when there was something really you can smell and feel that there's something going on in Shanghai that's about to like bubble up.
Yeah.
I think back then it was like Labelhood for sure. That was kind of the platform that presented a lot of the young designers since the very beginning. So, definitely we have to give credit to them. There's still very much presence in the Shanghai Fashion Week calendar. So they're like the kind of incubator of new designers. So a lot of, new designers were given the opportunity to, and also be very much supported here. So that's why a lot of people were willing to come back here. So I think at the beginning, some of them would do a show in London or in Paris or Milan and New York, and then do another one here for the domestic audience. And I think for the domestic audience, the show was very interesting is because they always do two shows. So the first one is for like press, media, and buyers and influencers and stuff. And the second one is always open to public. So kind of like, so we always do two shows back then for the Labelhood designers. You can definitely see this like huge passion and public involvement and engagement that was, like explosive. And so I think that's why a lot of the, designers chose to, I think at the beginning, kind of like do it there and here. And then later on, they're just like, oh, actually, we can also just do it here and then send the materials outwards. And then, probably a lot of them also have showrooms in Europe at the same time as well. Or, I feel like nowadays where we are becomes less and less restricted.
Yeah, it's not really relevant.
Yeah, like I can do one season here and then one season in Paris and then next season, I don't know, virtually, and then the next season not in the calendar. I feel like this traditional sensibility has been changed, of course, since COVID, and also because of Instagram,
Of course.
and all the social media platforms. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So pretty much they dreamt, they went to the West, they experienced the West, maybe something as you said, as trivial as just having difficulty with finding visas or any other reason whatsoever motivate them to go back home. And then going back home, they noticed that there really was a cultural shift of true appreciation and value for fashion designers, for local fashion designers to not only focus on, their local markets, but also to expand internationally. So that's pretty much what it is in a nutshell, right?
I think kind of to how would I put it, like kind of the first part, kind of
because I'm sorry to interrupt, because I'm looking at it as a perspective of somebody that's from your generation as well, because how old are you? 20 28 27. You're exactly the same age as me, right? So I can sort of understand the motivations. I'm from Mexico originally. I went to London. I studied in London. I went through the exact same process, just from a different country. I don't have that. Like if I'm in Mexico right now, sort of like as a sort of holiday, but I cannot see myself developing professionally here, let alone the fashion brand here. The infrastructure is not here. None of those factors are here. But even if they were, I probably wouldn't be here in Mexico, you know? So I do want to understand, like, what is it that makes people in China go back to China and truly be, well, motivated to stay there? Is it, again, I understand the shift that it went to, but is it some sort of like this mindset of wanting to represent the country internationally? Is it something that, like, what is it? What is that motivator, that strong motivator
Yeah.
for you guys?
I think in our generation, it's a little bit less about representing the country internationally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for sure, I think number one is the domestic market for sure.
Right.
You know, it's a huge fashion consumption market. And also we're kind of experiencing this times in the last decade was this also, you know, for sure the local market had this growing sense that, oh, actually local designers and like Chinese designers, their concepts and ideas and stuff are just as good, or you know, or they start to value local and foreign brands in a whole new way. So
And
I
there's a
think
local market for it. You know, you can actually
yes,
make
for
a
sure.
good living off of it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I always say kind of we're now at the Chinese designer generation 3.0, which was like I think the first generation was like the ones who like they were, you know, they were like, they call themselves like something something New York or something something Paris. And then they kind of, the first generation kind of like was more outwards. And then, you know, they wanted to first establish in the West and then come back. And then the second generation was kind of like, they wanted to come start from China and be like, we're Chinese designers. And then they're super proud of that. And they wanted to like show the world what like Chinese design is.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we're kind of at the third generation where also, I guess people our age as well, we care a little bit less about this now. We're more like, oh yeah, but like I'm, I'm this, but then my identity is also not just Chinese. You know, we're
Mm-hmm.
all kind of very fluid, third, fourth, fifth culture Chinese people now.
Yeah.
And I think not just the designers who studied abroad, I think, you know, for a lot of people as well.
Yeah. Of course.
Now we're more like, oh, you know what? We want to scream less about where we are, like where we're from, but just about who we are and what we think.
Mm-hmm.
So not to have people put us into the Chinese designer box.
Of course.
I think, yeah, it was very much this delabelizing movement that's going on, which also makes us more international because, and you know, like whatever we're doing, I think amongst all the designers like Dido, Windowson, Yue Qiqi and stuff, that Ray, for example, who won the Karl Lagerfeld Prize last year. I think
Mm-hmm.
this generation Chinese designers are doing things that are a lot more universal. We want to do things that the world can all resonate in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And find their connections. I think that it was the same as you know, kind of us trying to help Western, like foreign brands coming to China and find their resonance here. We're also similarly trying to find the resonance globally.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I feel like this is definitely working. And I, you know, like people would say, oh, like when, like, you know, this brand doesn't look like a Chinese brand. And it's good. We want to change that perception. It's like, we're not all just like dragon embroideries, you know. Like we're also like, you know, if you look at Windowson, it's like super sci-fi, futuristic, alien, anime, everything merged together. That's super contemporary Chinese in a way that
Mm-hmm.
no European designers at this time of time would go there, because we're, you know, for us, we live in a hyper technological society. We watch anime and like kind of drag shows now is like a huge thing. You know, we're kind of influenced by all kinds of stuff, and that's contemporary Chinese, in our opinion. It reflects our society and our, you know, our current state of the generation.
Interesting. Yeah, no, and I can definitely relate with everything that you're saying. Again, to a level, because I personally went through a very similar process, and I do understand this, um, this fluidity of this almost fluidity of like cultural identity. You know, so you sort of are able to understand how every country identifies itself, and therefore have like an international view of how everything works and integrates with each other, in both the challenges and the productive parts of it. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I do find it very interesting. I think that in a way has been probably the single most biggest contributing factor of, you know, cultural shifts like this is being able to, verse yourself in how the world works internationally, especially through creatives. But that said, I wanted to go back a little bit to when you started the PR agency, because I guessing in a way that's what you do. Like that identity, that philosophy that reflects itself in the way that you do business, and the fact that I don't really want to, box myself into just being PR or just being creative. Like it's funny how the creative sphere is ever so often demanding this almost generalized yet specialized approach to every single facet of the industry. And that's what you're doing pretty much with Bow Project, right?
Kind of, yes. Even though all my teammates are like, "Oh my God, are we gonna do that as well?" Like, I was like, "Yeah, we can do it. And I know we can do it better than like
Yeah, so it's a
whoever."
mixture of that and of your personality.
I think it's very much my personality that I mean, like I think we always joke about how we're slowly becoming an end-to-end process in fashion. It's like, it's also, like I myself sometimes do some shootings, and then I'm also very much encouraging my team, like everyone in the project, to like develop their own personality, their own skills, interests, hobbies. One is I started DJing like not long ago. And then one of our colleagues is also a DJ, and then another one's an artist, another one's a model, another one's like a painter, and the other one wants to write poems, another one is like Jackson Wang's photographer. Everyone kind of has their own character, and I also wanted to change the perception of like I don't know, like I think I didn't really have like a very distinct business plan. I just always did like kind of had the company or the this family in a way that I feel like is right, with the right values. Like I don't want, it's quite equal. I make everyone vote on decisions, like whether we should work with a brand or not. We all discuss together. I don't want to be kind of the dominant kind of dictator in the situation. And everyone's very much a very, I want to,
Yeah, it's very democratized.
democratized in a way, and also feels fresh and young. And I think that's the only way that you can have new creativity, because I can't come up with all the ideas, even though like everybody has super different perspectives on things. And Bow Project works because everybody has their idea input into the core. Sometimes I probably just need to like refine it a little bit. And yeah, like I wanted to keep the company young with like fun spirit, so that's how you can move things forward. But at the same time, whatever we're doing behind is also super professional. So I feel like to change a little bit from traditional agencies as well, where you feel like everyone's like stiff, and then they're told something by the HQ and then they execute, and that's it. Like sure, they can execute super well, but I always feel like there's lacking a little bit of fun or spark in there.
Okay, no, I completely get what you're saying. Yeah, so it's you give people the incentives to find their own creative outlooks outside of work so that they can bring those new perspectives into work, and then your role is just managing that process, being able to embrace everybody's ideas, or embrace everybody's point of view, and then just adapt and tailor it based on the specifics of the business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Cool.
mean, because I always tell them I did a whole bunch of side hustles. Like, so I very much encourage you guys to do a whole bunch of like side hustles, because those are the things that also build me. And those are the things that will be, I don't want you to just do this job, but sure, you have to do it well, like when you're working with us. But I'm very happy for you to develop different other skills and interests, and even other career abilities that will for sure bring back to the community and the family.
Awesome. And what would you say was the biggest skill or strength or benefit that you had to offer when you started Bow Project? Was it the skills that you developed at working Mr. Porter? Or was it creative skills? Was it PR skills? Was it a network and contacts? Like, what was your biggest advantage?
I guess the advantage was probably the understanding of kind of East-West dynamics, I guess.
Right.
I feel like for sure from like Mr. Porter and stuff, I learned all the the essential, crucial part. And also how you work with different brands, making sure that their message is like, carried out well, and all the content commerce side of things. But then I feel like when I was, because I like worked with different like local agencies or PR agencies and stuff before, as the client side. Sure, they do amazing jobs like on all the tasks, but I always felt like there was something different that I could do that makes it a bit more fun. And I feel like a lot of, I think like foreign brands kind of they feel like we can speak the same language, well, literally and also metaphorically, so that they feel like, but at the same time, I also can speak the same language with like people here, like literally and metaphorically. So it was kind of like the good, like diplomat, I guess, in a way. I always say I'm actually just, doing diplomacy in fashion. But yeah, I think that was for sure, because you could kind of see like a lot of, sometimes some fashion workers in China, they would kind of come up or want to do things that people from other countries wouldn't fully be able to comprehend. And then sometimes they may feel like, oh, maybe it's not on brand, maybe this is not right, maybe she is not right, because the rules are very, very different of how you play it. But then there is that way that you can connect the two, for sure. So I feel like that was probably our advantage.
Yeah, your competitive advantage. Awesome. And how about how important is network in your model? Like knowing designers, knowing people, knowing clients. How important was it, and how did you personally develop it?
Right, for sure, it's super important. But I feel like I never kind of developed networks on the basis of networking.
Right.
I think a lot of I guess networks that you can call it now is we're just like friends before. We were just like partying together or like hanging out.
Sure, you guys went to the same schools, you were in the same social circles.
Not really the same schools. Or I guess also like I was writing the column before us, and that for sure like made a lot of connections and friendships. But I think also it's kind of like I always joke about it is that we were literally just partying together somewhere in the world, and then now we've grown up and we're like
Now we're old. Yeah. Now we're old and have careers.
Career path, and then all of a sudden our career paths all come kind of together. With a lot of brands, and then obviously you have that trust base that has been built for so many years, not just based on working, but of course, we all know that each other do good stuff, so it just becomes very instinctive and natural to work together now. And I guess then it's word of mouth. And then I think a very important part is I always try to be nice to everybody, because I always tell my staff as well, you don't want to burn bridges that may cut off the road somewhere. This person may just be a fashion assistant, but he or she will become a director one day, maybe, and then you don't want to like burn the bridge, for the potential future. So always be kind and nice to everyone. Always make friends with them first instead of wanting something directly. That's always bad.
Sure.
And always just like before, when I used to go on meetings, we just talk about, like, even it was like a work meeting, like we don't talk about work the whole lunch, and then at the very end we're like, oh, by the way, like you become friends with them. I wanted to get to know this person, like have like real connections or find that connection. And then at the very end, I'm like, oh, by the way, we got this coming up. Like, do you want to work together? It's like, yeah, sure. And then it's like done.
Yeah, no, I get it. So it was a very, very organic process. You guys maybe out of going events, you started treating people nicely. You obviously had something in common. The relationship developed itself again, mostly as a friendship organically. And that has, as a result, reflected itself in, the networking effect sort of.
Yeah. I guess, it was kind of like, I never thought, to be honest, I didn't think I would want to start my own business before. It just kind of happened. And it just kind of felt like, it's like, okay, it makes sense actually for me to do this. I feel like I kind of have to do this. And more and more, I feel like, oh shit, sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm like it's me or like probably no one. So I have to do this. And more it's like becoming in this way. And of course, everything I do, also with the brands that we choose to work with, I always be really careful because I think it's a two-way thing. It's not like
Of
you
course.
come, even if you come with a budget, but if there's no click here, I'm not going to be able to deliver amazing work.
Of
But
course.
if you come and then we really connect, and also with my whole team as well, they have to also, have the connection.
Mhm.
And we can work exceptionally because we all believe in it together. Yeah.
Of course. Awesome. And when it comes to services, what do you think the biggest, again, dissonance in that sense is? Do you think companies really struggle understanding how to communicate creatively? Is it more about understanding how to communicate and relate with social and philosophical ideas? What is the biggest challenge? Because I'm trying to understand if China has a completely different way of thinking about creative identity in general, or is it mostly just the creative language is international. It can be understood everywhere, but it's just a matter of how that is connected with relevant events, relevant people, relevant cultural figures. What is the challenge or the dissonance mostly?
I think it's still very much in, I think, cultural understanding, like cross-cultural understanding.
Right.
Uh, for sure. I think that's still the biggest dissonance here. And that's also actually a large part of our day-to-day work, actually. If we have great ideas, we have to also have this idea be understandable for, let's say, a French person or Italian person,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. And I feel like that process of nuance and figuring out the boundaries of everyone and their comfort zones, or even it's like we want to work with something that's super out, like groundbreaking here, and that's super different from what the brand would normally do in the West,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually happening nowadays. And I'm very happy that we're able to kind of push them to try new limits here as well, kind of like this experimental
Yeah.
playground at the moment. I feel like, especially when a lot of like foreign brands come to China, previously I feel like before they sometimes had this notion of what they are bringing to China. But I think this new notion is how you're going to work and collaborate with China,
Mm.
which is super, super important. Because you can't just come, I feel like now, like less and less so, you can't just come in with, sure, your work must be amazing, but why should people here care? That's
Right. There's a lot
becoming
of amazing brands. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's becoming a big dissonance here nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, of course, that's done through like really like storytelling that people here would really understand in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, to take an example, which is a project that we started recently with Dries van Noten. I'm super happy. I'm personally a huge fan of them since my like student years. And so they have this huge like heritage of 3 decades of work of the brand. But then at the beginning, when I talked to some of my colleagues who were born probably like after like 1995 or the Gen Z generation,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of them don't know. They're like, oh yeah, I've heard about the brand. Oh really? And you feel like that's kind of the similar, because we didn't have internet or international fashion publications in the 90s.
Of
So
course.
people here were kind of like missed out on a big part of what was going on in the world. Of course, there are like, some really like elites and like people in the industry would understand and
Understand. Of
love.
course. Highly educated
But
ones. Yeah.
yeah, so then I was like, well, so they've done like more than 100, like probably 50 now shows. They have this amazing like shows, like 2 books of like 1 to 100 shows, and they kind of documented every show's behind the scene, kind of the process in text and like vintage film photos and stuff. And I thought it was incredible, and we have to bring this kind of translated to almost like archive it here on like their digital channels in China. And then that just kind of became, everyone was so interested. We just posted their kind of the announcement of it, and also the first show in the archive project. And then you could really see people connecting with it in a whole different way. Um, yeah, and to understand the brand that, probably like they come here, they think that everybody already knows, but actually no, you have to almost retell your story in a way that people here would understand, which is super important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like learning how to speak a different language, literally.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
how do you help brands, or should brands approach that while still being true to themselves? Because I think that is the biggest challenge, right? Whenever
Yeah.
you're trying to be relevant to any new audience or philosophical ideas or culture, is okay, I can understand it, I can understand their viewpoints, but how is that relatable, or how is that translatable to who I am as a brand or who I am as a designer? Because a lot of their jobs is just to have a very solidified and assertive sense of who they are, but it's a weird balance. So how do you approach it?
Yeah. So because the cultural landscapes nowadays are becoming so like separated, more and more so, I feel like. So I always feel like we have to drag the two strings and pull them in together.
Mm-hmm.
Here there's completely different celebrity landscape, very different entertainment, idols, the arts, culture, creative photography, everything's becoming kind of like we're growing a different sprout.
Yeah, and in every aspect, right? Because even so, for example, and this is me as a Mexican, correct me if this is the same thing in China, but you talk about racism, you talk about politically correct ideologies, you talk about this entire movement that is massive in the West, and in Mexico nobody cares about it, like nobody at all. And it's difficult because you're getting this really really strong pull, as you said, towards a certain direction as a brand, yet on the other side you're getting the opposite. Maybe it's actually not productive for you to be talking about this because we don't care about this, we don't think it's that important, we think this is important, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I think, when it comes to that, you kind of have to extract the core essences of the brand. Let's say, what's an example? I think every brand, for sure, these political causes and activism and stuff, it's huge in the US, and kind of like every brand have to follow that path right now, have to have a political stance.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, it's much less so. It's like it's not like that here either.
Exactly.
And then here, it's kind of like you have to, and also China's huge. It's a huge country. You have to think of it as Europe. And different cities and regions have their own habits and mindsets. And even to like, how do you speak to everyone, or like it's becoming harder and harder as well. So then you really have to, so what I feel like I always would do is to extract that core essence of the brand. Let's say, is it music, is it floral, is it like kind of contemporary art, is it graffiti, is it abstract, is it and you kind of take those elements and you have to find the similar communities here, and you have to kind of plant these things into the communities here. Of course, you have to do it in kind of a pyramid form. So on the very top, you have like the super high-end brand building stuff that you have to do. In the middle end is
Celebrities,
like all that stuff to get people know the name. And like this jacket, for example, the sweater. And then in the middle is like the storytelling part, which you really have to do well. And that's super hard here because a lot of times you have to go back to the beginning to tell the story. Through all the digital like social media channels, and also through kind of how do you almost like translate the story in a way that people care here. And then at the bottom part is more like kind of community building. We call it cultural opinion leaders now. So it's like there's key opinion leaders, which is like the influencers, but cultural opinion leaders are like
the innovators,
people.
the guys that have 1,000
Yeah,
followers but are doing things that nobody else is doing. Yeah.
exactly. Yes. So, and I think that's also for sure in the West as well with TikToks and these new algorithms. It kind of changed the way how we perceive who is famous,
Mm-hmm.
or who is amazing, not famous. So, before you kind of, and I think that, which I'm super happy about as well. I think previously a lot of the influencers were just flaunting of things they have and their wealth. But I feel like the new generation want to see, they don't care about what you have, they care about what you do. So what you do is becoming more important. So then we're seeing these like, it could be like a guy who's like super young but has like started his own art museum because he has
Right.
great taste.
Right.
Or it could be like this guy who's like a scientist studying quantum physics, but like is telling through like vlogs, explaining to kids what it is. It could be a guy who's super into biology and like studies all the ecosystems of like different mountain ranges. That's cool. I think that people are perceiving things very differently now in this new generation.
Right. Wow, very interesting. And what's your personal approach to understanding all of these factors? Because, and again, using myself as an example, because probably maybe people in the audience might relate a little bit more with me because of my lack of understanding in this particular topic, of course. Whenever I look or try to understand, modern culture, the 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 17-year-olds, people that are, defining what, culture is going to be in the future. I mean, I try to understand. I have these conversations and I notice that, like, I think, wow, I'm so old. Like, I'm so outdated. Every single time that I have this new conversation, first with a 23-year-old, then with a 20-year-old, then with a 17-year-old, like the mindset shift happens so quickly that a 27-year-old can have those conversations and be like, I have no idea what's going on. I don't
Yeah.
understand this at all because of the speed that it's moving in. So how do you approach it? Is it like a continuous learning process? Do you go out there, you have conversations? Do you see what's happening? Do you see what's relevant? Like, how do you approach this learning process? Because it's so fast, and I've just noticed that it becomes increasingly faster.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I think so. That's also why I want to have the company or our team quite democratic, and that's actually precisely why.
Mm.
Like I was like probably cool when I was like
Dude,
in my
like
early.
I was cool like
I
4 years
was
ago.
cool.
What happened? Yeah. What
I
happened?
was
Like,
like,
how in
I
4 years,
guess I
how
was
in 20 years
cool,
can you be the old guy
and
at
now
the
I'm like,
party that doesn't get
yeah.
anything, you know?
So that's why I always, for sure, I have to admit that, with all these like business and company and stuff, I don't party as much like before. I don't go to like the coolest, edgiest parties anymore. I still try to though. Actually, I feel like I go to more than my Gen Z stops
Yeah.
to like raves and parties. But really just like I think not just about partying or like the musical culture. It's really about, we call it in China like the very, like, how do you call it, like perpendicular. Whatever you're into, dig in, like dig into that, whatever you're like, that is. And I always just like, everyone can come into my office, like the interns do the assistants, and I always asked, oh, like, what are you watching nowadays? And then they're like, oh, they talk about something, this show, or I always ask everyone's opinion if we need to brainstorm something. And and very often, like it's like, oh wow, actually, so like this kid who studies law, like joined us as an intern, and then I discovered he seems like this very kind of serious, shy, timid kind of guy. And then I just kind of had a conversation with him, and I realized he's like super into Chinese supermodels, and he like follows them, and like in this like huge fandom situation, knows everyone and what shows they walk this season, and like all the statistics and who's in, who's not. I was like, well, actually, you could be a really good casting director, and like for this project, you could kind of take the lead and like contact them and work with them. You kind of like I'm not as crazy about Chinese supermodels. I know them, some of them are my good friends, but the industry really well in that sense. Or this girl who's like she's a bit of an influencer herself as well. She has her own fan group chats where she like delivers daily doses of content, and then she also asked them about like such as feminist topics. She kind of had this kind of body image anxiety phase before, but then now she's become super confident about it and very vocal about it as well. So then like I oftentimes ask her about her experiences as a young woman in China, kind of like, even like she's also has a big online following and kind of online opinions. Of course, there's people like talking shit about her, but there's also a lot of supporters as well. So you kind of get a feel of like kind of new generation Chinese kids sensibility on body, on even sex, gender, kind of those topics. So And then yeah, we also have another one who's like super into drag culture. So I mean, I also go to a lot of the drag balls, and it's super fun here. It's like a huge thing nowadays, the voguing ball scene. And then one of our teammates, he's like at work, he's like dressed as a Uniqlo, like total look, kind of like he looks like he works in IT. And then whenever we need to go out to an event, he's like, wait a minute, and he changes into this like glam, like, but you know, look with this crazy makeup, super fun. So you kind of tap it, you know, of course through everyone's world and visions, you learn and you continue have to evolve with times as well. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I love that learning approach relative, like based on team building and having that team building approach of, okay, not only what can they bring to the table, but what can I learn from them, you know, or what can we learn from each other in that sense? Because I understand what you mean in terms of understanding what certain people are specializing in terms of their interest or their actual skills, and understanding how they can bring, or how you can create this almost like collaborative environment by a lot of people that have, yes, their own fields of expertise and specialize in or interest, but that at the same time can complement each other in an environment, in a working environment, and a personal environment as well.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like it's especially like we work in PR and like creatives. I can't know every single person on the planet. And I also can't think of every crazy idea on the planet either.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more about this process that we need to talk about. And I'm also very much the kind of person, I can't think of anything on my own. I need to always talk to someone, and then the idea will come out through the conversation. So yeah, that's very important to me.
Interesting. And where do you think how do you think everything's going to look going forward relative to, you know, everything that we've discussed? Do you think that there's a higher probability of, you know, internationally brands really understanding how to, you know, almost mold themselves relative to the country and the location and the culture? Or do you think this is just going to help uh, local cultures, local markets, local brands really become the next big things? So is it going to continuously be monopolized, or whatever the word is in English, you know, controlled by the bigger brands that learn how to do this productively? Or is it more a fact of this is giving more opportunity to the brands that are local to their own markets and to their own locations?
Um, I think it's definitely going in also a more equalized positioning.
Mm-hmm.
I think Margaret being in Vogue China was also a very big paradigm shift for sure. I was, you know, yeah, like of course, like coming in at this age, she's I think 1 year older than us.
Mm-hmm.
I think at that super high position, like I was in a meeting with her today, and I'm sure she like must be going through insane pressure as well. But then I think what she's doing is that, and it's also very similar to my belief, is to level up the playing field and make real connections between East and West. Like she, you know, for example, we want to like have a super established kind of like, I don't know, Nicolas Ghesquière, Jonathan Anderson, for example, you know, like kind of think wild to connect or collaborate with a local Chinese designer or having conversation. I know last year the Pier Paolo from Valentino collaborated with Caroline Hu, who's a very young Chinese couturier. Like she's not a couturier, but whatever she does is like feels very couturier and very contemporary as well. And I think that's what you know, for sure what I'm also wanting to do as well, is to connect the people so that we're not just playing in parallel universes. We want to start making the conversations happen. Of course, with our connections both here and internationally as well. I really want to use that strength, and yeah, so that we're not just talking each other's stories anymore. I think that was happening a lot before. We need to like talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that I understand. So it's not a matter of it's not a zero sum game of, you know, the big companies that they learn how to do this productively would eventually, you know, stay at the top again. And it's also not, you know, it's going to be a big window of only the small designers to come up, but it's going to be a balance. It's going to be more, as you said, a collaboration, you know, the opportunity to, you know, help local brands get established, while at the same time help international brands cement themselves in very specific geographical and cultural locations.
Yeah, also I think especially since this year, I'm starting to kind of get more and more like there's a couple of projects ongoing, can't disclose yet, but they're kind of like the bigger international luxury brands. And they're now very much willing to listen to us actually. And we're just proposing all these like new creatives and crazy ideas and stuff. And they kind of, they accepted it. And we found that connection between like us and the creative director in, in Europe or US. And they really believed. So I think that's super exciting, is that they're starting to see this creative value of what we're making here, or the scene and what everyone's doing. And we're much more open to communicate and work together. That's super exciting. I think even from and a lot of the big brands now are even looking at, let's say, who are we inviting to like the new cool designer shows, and see, okay, so like now there's like this trend. So sometimes they become like, then some of the big luxury brands start to like invite them, like they're kind of seeing through the youth movements through our work. And for sure, like we'll grow up as well, so we'll have our stance. So one day we're already starting to work with the luxury brands to bring these things up and up.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, I completely get what you're saying. So it's the mentor, the big figure, and the underdog collaborating in specific ways, which used to not happen at all. The bigger players have all the control or the vision, all the decision making, and now those people are becoming a lot more open minded in terms of how they can learn and work with people that are the underdogs of the industry, the up and coming designers. It can apply with both designers. It can apply to creative agencies, PR agencies, artists. Again, anybody that would be relevant creatively in this industry or any other aspect of the industry.
Yeah, so I think it's super exciting times actually.
Interesting. And what was the biggest shift that you think happened because of COVID? Because I think that, if we can learn anything about the last 2 years, is that it just accelerated things that were already going to happen anyway. But what have you seen has been the biggest shift? And I don't really want to talk about, social media, because it's clearly obvious, that everything that was digitalized is now 100 times stronger, e-commerce, social media communication, social media platforms, the importance of direct to consumer e-commerce. But other than that, maybe more culturally, philosophically, and communications wise or creatively, what has been the biggest shift that you've noticed?
I think, how China, experienced COVID, I feel like it's a little bit different than the rest of the world.
Of course.
Like now I'm in a lockdown, which is like haven't happened since 2020. So I feel like I'm back to 2 years ago, which I'm actually really enjoying, because I'm like, oh, finally I have time to like read and like take a bath. But at the beginning, I think from a very macro perspective, like the world has become quite fucked up. Globalization seems to have stopped and gone backwards. Now with the war coming up, and then China like being this super sensitive position in the world, I think this has definitely resulted in, and of course, but at the same time, China became like still a bigger and bigger share in global fashion consumption. So it's kind of like this huge, as the West call it, an ideological rivalry. But at the same time, like everyone is so dependent on each other. So I feel like this dynamic is becoming really tricky, but at the same time, like, also quite, like, I guess, exciting. Not exciting. No, I hate it. But in time, it kind of fused.
Yeah, interesting, curious. Yeah.
Yes, but I feel like this situation, especially the past 2 years, like people aren't able to come in and we aren't able to go out, kind of, well, I guess in a way, fused us, like our generation, to take place, because they have to completely trust us now. And I think through a couple of the exercises and things that we have done, like with big or small local or international global projects, we kind of developed are developing this global standard more and more and more. I think not just in creatives, like photography, writing, like stylists, art directors, like everyone's kind of like got their chance to do huge global projects.
Right.
That happens here, or that will translate also to the rest of the world. So I think this was definitely a very interesting kind of thing that happened, I guess. And on a more micro or civic level, I feel like it definitely stopped a whole generation of Chinese kids to look outwards, which is very strange because I think our generation, like I like went to every corner of the world, like fell in love, party, like did everything, traveled, like backpacked, like just crashed random things, and then like I feel like that's how I grew up. Like crash, like when I was younger, I just crashed random Paris Fashion Week parties, and then like get drunk, and then like meet new people, and then that kind of formed my, I guess now, connections.
Your identity. Yeah.
My identity. And I feel like this, like at least a lot of my employees who are from the next generation, who probably got when they were studying abroad or CSM and stuff, they actually was just online, and then even though they were in London, they couldn't meet anyone, there was nothing happening, so they kind of come back, and then I can feel that they're like missing a very big part of it. And I feel very like eager to like I was talking with Stavros from Machine, and like this legendary store in London, I'm sure like he was talking about all these things that happened, in SIF in Copenhagen, and then the stuff that he did with Olafur Eliasson and all these like designers, from Kiko to Paula Canovas, and all these people. And I feel like a lot of the times the younger kids, they haven't been there, they didn't go to Paris or like any of these random places, like or any of these places in the world, so they will never really understand what it really, like the importance or the meaning behind these things. So I feel like that's a little bit of a shame. Of course, we have a very vibrant things happening here, so then now they've become really very much just looking inwards. So that's something I feel like.
And when you say looking inwards, do you mean personally, or do you mean in the sense of their identity as well? Because I guess, and I find you saying that super, super interesting, because again, our generation was, as you said, it was always looking outwards. It was all about, what's next that's not here with me. That's either, and it could be a personal idea, like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what my parents think, but I know this is not what the world thinks, and I know that this is not what is out there. It can be creatively, oh, this is the artist here, but I know this is not how the world is creatively, and that affects how we view the world, right? We view the world as a very international place. We understand it. We view it that way. Yes, there's different countries, there's different political ideologies. There's different rivalries, but we don't feel them because we don't relate with them, right? Personally, we understand them superficially, but we don't relate with them on the deeper level. But do you think the younger generations, because of that, are relating to differences, and because of the nature, the conflicting nature of the world in the recent years? Do you feel that sort of sense and that flexibility when it comes to not only creativity, but also ideologically is happening as well?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think our generation, like when we just went everywhere in the world and you met everyone in the world.
You met,
like,
and you met somebody from you went to school with somebody from Saudi Arabia, somebody from the States, somebody that your grandparents might have think is, comes from like a terrorist family or something. We understand the world as it is because of our international experiences with it. And that affects how you view it, right? And that affects how you think about things politically. Like right now, if you look at the conflict, I'm assuming you understand the rivalries between China and the United States, but you don't feel them yourself, because you kind of have both things in you. And if all of a sudden that flips, and younger people stop feeling or having these experiences that allow them to have this point of view of the world, it might be detrimental in terms of how they're able to develop themselves ideologically, creatively, personally, professionally.
For sure. I think it very much comes down to person. Like we're humans, like let's say I meet an American. Sure, we have crazy ideological, like on a macro level, we seem like we should be enemies, but we just really fucking love each other. We think each other's super cool and great. So then that will change how you view these macro
These
things,
events, you know.
things that happen. Like I have Ukrainian friends, so like, and I also have Russian friends. So then of course, you know, both sides, and I think meeting them. So I think kids nowadays, when they're not able to go outside and just meet random people from around the world and talk to them and have that connection, also for the world to see like that, oh, like I'm sure a lot of the world would think of China as like, you know, everyone in army walking across like people like Tiananmen Square,
Sure.
or like these, you know, super scary like like factories and like Foxconn. And then all the time I'm like, well, you know what, like sure, but we also have a voguing ball happening tonight, and like we're also going to a music festival. Like we're also the same, like we're just people as well. And I think when you understand the world from people, you understand it completely differently.
Mhm.
Yeah, so a lot of my friends tell me like, you know, sometimes they look at our Instagrams as the window to see what's really happening in China versus what they're reading and watching on the news. And is the big miscommunication and misunderstanding that's created from this, you know, the serious stuff. So I think on the civic cultural stuff, I want to make this as fluid and everyone to understand each other better as much as possible. And I think fashion is a medium in this sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the industry in general, the open nature of the industry helps people become developed in this sense, like internationally. But now that you said that, because of what's happening, you know, with COVID politically, people don't get the opportunity to have these experiences. How have you seen it affects them? And it could be maybe a theory or something that you've observed. Like, what are the dangers of that?
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous actually, because for example, the other day I heard, uh, you know, for example, like a colleague of mine or a friend of mine who probably didn't study abroad, and you know, he or she wouldn't look outwards as much, or even they don't follow that many people on Instagram, for example. They really don't see the opinion from the other side. So she was telling me about this thing, how which was super pro Russia, and I was like, what? How
Right.
could a 21-year-old, I just, it kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, I didn't know. I mean, for sure, she's innocent. She's completely innocent.
Right.
It's just because the information, like she doesn't have friends,
The
you know,
references.
from
Yeah. She doesn't have the
references
experiences.
who
Yeah.
talk about these things, or the news sources. You know, not everybody here, like people here won't read New York Times all the time. Like kids don't read news anymore. They're not going to read different opinions. Like I was, you know, I study this, so I'm super interested. Every day I watch news as a way to relax, but and get more stressed. um, but yeah, so I feel like that's super scary, is that if they don't have that human connection with the world, and all they see is hatred like expressed through news and online kind of comments, that's super dangerous for the world that we're about to go into in the
Mm,
next days. And I think that's a very similar problem, not just here, it's everywhere in the world as
everywhere.
well. Yeah, it's like how in the US there's such a big political divide nowadays, anywhere in the country, populism, because people don't see or have human connection on the other side.
Mhm.
Uh, and then the more and more and more they believe so strongly in what they're told, or you know, what they've read. That's, yeah, that
That is
really.
so interesting. I've never thought about it that way. I have never thought about, the micro ideological problems that came as a result of being
Yeah,
locked in both literally physically in your house, but also with what you're seeing in your phone. And
yeah,
I never thought about it that way. And, it's funny how you sort of learn things through these conversations, because again, I never experienced that ideological extremism of believing very strongly in this or believing super strongly on this other thing. I've always been very flexible, but it's
right,
again
yeah,
because of my experience, the experience of our generation, of being able to travel, being able to understand, being able to know people. And wow, that is going to be not a good thing creatively, of course, but also, in every single aspect. Wow.
yeah.
Very, very
So
interesting.
I feel like at least on whatever we're, you know, what we're doing here, is really like impactful and meaningful. and I think whatever we're doing on a day-to-day basis as well, through PR or creatives, is to also spread the same message. Is that,
Message.
yeah, like, yes, sure, you know, everybody thinks that we live in this super scary totalitarian regime city where there's no life, but actually no, like, we're also just people. I want to show them that we also want to have fun, we also like party, we also like DJ, and we love the same music, you know. Like, once the moment you find these connections and similarities with people from anywhere in the world, you start to understand the world very differently. And yeah.
Yeah, and you can treat a business, a professional relationship, just as you would a personal relationship if you have those fundamental understanding of, you know, the differences between, yes, this company and this country, but also this person and this person individually, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome, Bohan. Well, that's been an awesome conversation. Wow, I can talk about these things for hours, so I do have to make it to a stop, especially because I don't know how late it is over there. But I do want to end this episode on the last note that I always try to end on, and that is if you could go back to, you know, whatever point, whatever part of your life you needed the biggest piece of advice. It could be professional, it could be personal advice, it could be creative advice. What would be the biggest piece of advice that you give yourself and why?
Give myself or other people?
No, yourself. If you could go back to a particular moment in your time where you needed advice the most, and it could be creatively, it could be career related, it could be personal, what would be the best piece of advice you'd give yourself and why?
Be patient. Super stupid, but
yeah. Yeah, says the guy with 20. Says the guy that at 27 has a PR agency, a PR and creative communications. I understand that. I understand. At 21, I thought like, hey, why do I have like my own business with 100 people? I'm 21. Like, what's going on?
I think it's because I think because before I always wanted to do a million things. But then actually, you know, other people told me this advice actually, and then I was like, no, I'm not gonna. And then I'm like, oh, actually it makes sense. You know, I think you always understand something when you're older. And you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, it makes sense. I think it was more kind of referring to you know, like our generation, we grew up with like TED Talks and like Instagram and like
YouTube
YouTube's, and I feel like you always seem to probably like want something really fast, and that's innate into our nature,
of course,
especially our generation. So I think I'm happy that I think especially the 4 years that I spent at Mr. Porter, and then like all the things that I did before, it made sense at one point. And it just kind of felt natural for me to do this now. And, you know, who knows what I'll be doing next. But first, this is kind of the mission I have to do now. So I have to like complete this mission. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So just be patient and things will eventually happen for you. I agree, man. I agree with that.
Like,
I mean,
rushing into things will always, I feel like, do the opposite, or like when you're too forceful of relationship or opportunities, it never end up well.
Yeah, and you just suffer emotionally for. I mean, it's a very emotionally challenging process, right? You know, being around so many possibilities, having everything almost at the tip of your fingertips, but you know, looking at social media and finding this guy that at 20 years old has a brand because of this or whatever variable, and comparing yourself with that. And it is a very emotionally difficult process, not only because of, you know, anxiety, depression, but also the fact of, hey, it affects how productive you can get to your own goals because you're chasing things all the time, different things, now this tomorrow, then that tomorrow, then quit. And I understand the process. I think that every 20-year-old probably went through the similar process, especially the creative people, you know, because creative people, we always like to do everything and we're interesting in everything. So I do understand where you're coming from and I completely agree with it.
Yeah.
But awesome, Bohan. Man, that was a good episode. I really enjoyed that conversation. I really did. I sit with most of the times I sit with a lot of, you know, 40-year-old, 50-year-old executives, which I can really appreciate, understand, but you know, it's refreshing to sit down and talk with somebody that, you know, comes from somewhere that very similar to where I come from. and
Yeah.
just looks at the world in the same way, man. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah, I'm
that's what's
happy.
important.
Yeah, well, unite. High five.
Digital high five.
No, yeah, like we're all humans, like you're from Mexico, we're like furthest places away from on the planet, but like you can find this connection and you understand each other and each other's culture differently. Yeah. I always
Awesome,
find that
Mohan.
very
Well, thanks for being on the podcast, man. I really mean it. It was awesome to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun. Happy to talk about these things.